opening the session. Welcome to meeting number 40 of the Fisheries and Oceans Committee. I want to start by acknowledging that we are gathered on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people.
It's the committee's meeting to continue its study on the factors to determine opening and closing dates of marine harvesting seasons. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. We have one witness in hybrid and one member in hybrid. So pursuant to routine motions, I want to advise the committee that all witnesses appearing today have successfully conducted the tests and they're properly logged on. And I want to remind you of the following housekeeping points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those of you in the video conference, please look at the little globe at the bottom of your screen and you will be able to click onto the appropriate language for yourselves. And then I want to remind witnesses that committee members are going to ask questions in either French or English. So if I were you, I would make sure that I have my interpretation ready so we don't have to wait for too long before you get your interpretation with regard to the questions. And again, for members in the room, if you wish to speak, raise your hand, and the clerk and I would see how we can pick up the ones who were there first. Thank you. So I want to welcome all our witnesses today. And so from the Assembly of First Nations, we have Andrea Paul, Regional Chief of Nova Scotia. We have James McDonald, Director of Fisheries, and they're both by video conference. From the Fisheries Council of Canada, we have Jason McClinton, President, and by video conference, Grant Dovey, Member. From Icewater Seafoods, Inc., we have Alberto Wareham, President and CEO. And we will start with the witnesses' opening statements, just for the sake of the witnesses. Your opening statements are 5 minutes for the group, not per person, 5 minutes for your group. So those of you who are speaking for your group, you'll have 5 minutes. I will give you a 1 minute shout out and then a literal shout out and a 30-second shout out. So ignore me when you hear 1 minute and 30 seconds. You don't have to pay attention. Just it gives you an idea of how to wrap up so I don't have to stop you in mid-sentence. So now we will begin the opening remarks with Mr. Wareham. For 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Alberto Wareham, and I'm the President and CEO of Icewater Seafoods, a family-owned seafood company based in Arnold's Cove, Newfoundland and Labrador. Icewater operates the only food manufacturing facility in North America focused exclusively on North Atlantic cod. We focus on year-round operations and employment, with more than 300 employees during peak season, supplying premium cod products to customers in Europe and North America. My comments will focus on northern cod and the importance of a timely, practical and predictable fisheries management decisions, particularly around opening dates. Overall, the management of northern cod demonstrates that Canada can rebuild and responsibly manage fisheries over the long term. The return of a commercial fishery supported by a healthy and growing stock is a significant success story. Improvements in timing, process, and the alignment of harvesting opportunities with the realities of the resource can further improve the economic benefits, operations, and overall safety of fisheries. Northern cod is a migratory stock. During summer months, cod are concentrated in shallow waters close to the shore and accessible to small inshore vessels. In the fall and winter months, they migrate farther offshore into deeper waters. That migration pattern directly affects when different fleets can safely and effectively access the resource. Industry participants support the current spawning closure in place from approximately mid-April until the end of June. Given that the commercial fishery only reopened in 2024 after more than 3 decades under moratorium, that closure should continue until there is sufficient updated scientific information on spawning behaviour in today's climate conditions. However, with that spawning closure in place, timely opening decisions are critical. Northern cod in 25-26 was a good example. The annual management approach was announced on June 18, 2025, which was earlier than some past years, but still not as early as the June 1st date industry had requested. Additional delays followed, and the inshore fishery did not open until mid-July. Had the fishery opened July 1st, immediately following the end of the spawning closure, there would have been an additional 2 weeks of productive fishing time during one of the best periods of the year for the inshore fleet. In July, the weather conditions are generally more favourable. Cod are concentrated close to shore. Product quality is excellent, and small day boats can fish more safely and consistently. Last year, approximately 5,650 metric tons of the inshore allocation remained on-caught, roughly 20% of the inshore share. Although many factors can affect harvesting outcomes over the course of a season, timely openings help ensure harvesters have the fullest possible opportunity to access the resource under favorable conditions. For our operation alone, that 5,650 tons of on-caught cod represents more than $3 million in lost income for plant workers. We could have paid harvesters more than $12 million for additional catch, not including the broader economic impacts across rural communities and local businesses. A notable portion of that on-caught fish could have been harvested had the season opened 2 weeks earlier. Of the approximately 1,170 active licenses in the inshore northern cod fishery last year, the vast majority were true day boats that depend heavily on summer access when fish are close to shore and conditions are safest. Larger inshore vessels, representing only about 50 active vessels, typically harvest in the fall when cod has moved further from shore. Local offshore harvesters then harvest during the fall and winter when the stock is located in offshore waters. Season timing and allocation decisions should reflect stock migration, patterns, safety considerations, operational realities, and market needs. 2026 represents a particularly significant opportunity for northern cod and for Newfoundland and Labrador. The stock is healthy and growing. More than 70% of northern cod is now destined for premium markets in Europe, aligned with Canada's broader trade and export objectives. Global cod supply has declined by approximately 40% over the past 5 years, and demand and prices for high-quality cod products have strengthened considerably as a result. The economic losses experienced in 2025 would pale in comparison to the losses this year if cod is again left uncaught. On behalf of 300-plus people at Icewater Seafoods and the town of Arnold's Cove, who against the odds remain committed to cod through the 32-year moratorium, I encourage the government to ensure seasoning opening dates and management approaches reflect the realities of the resource. Doing so can provide industry with the ability to safely and effectively optimize the economic potential of this historic resource. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear today, and I look forward to your questions.
Oh, thank you. That was very timely. Thanks very much. I now go to the next person, who is the Assembly of First Nations, Mr. Chief Andrea Paul. Will you please begin? Thank you very much for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Good morning, Ms. Chair, co-chairs, and members of the committee. Thank you for your invitation to appear today. I want to begin by acknowledging that the committee is meeting on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. My name is Andrea Paul, Regional Chief for Nova Scotia, and I speak on behalf of the Assembly of First Nations. The AFN is mandated by First Nations in Assembly to advance and protect First Nations' inherent treaty and Aboriginal rights, including fisheries rights, and it is in that spirit that I am here today with you. I want to focus my remarks on the following themes. First, the AFN sees the timing of fisheries opening and closing dates as complex interplay of a myriad of issues, not simply operational. Second, there is a clear gap between what is required by law and what happens in practice. Third, we believe that there is a path forward, but it depends on implementation. First, fisheries timing cross-cuts jurisdiction, governance, and management. From the AFN perspective, this is not simply about scheduling or administration. The timing of opening and closing dates reflects who makes decisions, how those decisions are made, and whether affected First Nations are meaningfully involved. What we are seeing across the country, delayed openings, misaligned seasons, and inconsistent decisions is not new. These issues are tied to a system that is still largely centralized, where decisions are made with limited shared authority and continued reliance on ministerial discretion. The result is that timing decisions often do not reflect ecological realities or First Nations jurisdictions, governance, or priorities. First Nations fisheries are grounded in inherent and treaty-protected rights recognized under Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982. The Supreme Court of Canada has been clear. After conservation, First Nations fisheries have priority. But in practice, that priority is not consistently reflected, especially when it comes to timing. When fisheries open too late or not in alignment with migration, access is reduced in a very real way. This is not a question of policy gaps. That framework already exists. The issue is implementation, and this is what I mean by the implementation gap. Canada has committed to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which affirms First Nations' right to participate in decision-making and the principle of free, prior, and informed consent. Yet decisions about the opening and closing dates of fisheries are still made largely through centralized processes. That disconnect continues to drive the issues we are discussing today. This current study is happening in the context of ongoing tensions around salmon allocation, particularly on the Pacific Coast. We are seeing increased pressure from different sectors and growing narratives that frame fisheries access as a direct competition between and among user groups. It's important to be clear here. First Nation fisheries are not discretionary allocations. They are rights-based and in many cases are set out in modern land claim agreements as well as historical treaties. Timing decisions are one of the ways these broader pressures show up in practice, often in ways that limit access. The impacts of these decisions are immediate to First Nations. They affect access to food, social, and ceremonial fisheries, commercial and communal fisheries, and economic opportunities within communities. They also contribute to tension on the water, particularly where access overlaps and enforcement is uneven. These are concerns we continue to hear directly from First Nations across the country. There are also broader management issues that need to be acknowledged. We continue to see gaps in data and monitoring, limited use of Indigenous knowledge, and enforcement capacity that is stretched thin. For example, the impacts of catch and release fisheries, especially in warmer conditions, are not always fully reflected in decision-making. These pressures add to the challenges of managing already declining stocks. The path forward is not about creating new policies. It's about doing the work that already has been committed to. That means recognizing First Nations as right holders and government partners, moving toward co-development decision-making, and ensuring decisions are predictable, transparent, and aligned with Section 35. We already are seeing this practice through rights reconciliation agreements and other co-governance approaches. In closing, the timing of fisheries openings and closures is not an isolated issue. It reflects broader, long-standing challenges in how fisheries are governed in Canada. These challenges have been identified repeatedly and they remain unresolved. Without a shift toward co-jurisdictional, rights-based management, the same issues will continue to surface, including those related to timing and access. The AFN encourages the committee to focus on these underlying governance issues and to support approaches that ensure First Nations rights are fully recognized and implemented in practice. Walalio, thank you.
Thank you very much. I now go to the next witness, who is from the Fisheries Council of Canada, Jason McClinton, President.
Merci,
For
Madame
5 minutes, please, Mr. McClinton.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members, for the opportunity you've given me to speak on your review. The FCC, the Fisheries Council of Canada, represents Canadian fisheries and seafood industry and promotes a healthy resource and a thriving industry that plays a vital role in the Canadian economy.
Canada has a strong track record in how it determines marine harvest seasons. My comments are meant in the spirit of continuous improvement. Processes for opening and closing dates must be predictable and timely, and they must be based on robust core fisheries science. To achieve this, the Government of Canada must invest in core fisheries science, partner with industry to make full use of industry science, and provide ample notice of opening and closing dates. As with any sector, Canada's fisheries must have predictable and timely processes in place. Our sector faces enough uncertainty in wild fisheries with respect to fluctuating stocks, weather, input costs, and so on. Some of these variables are outside of our control. But government decisions about when and who can go fishing must be made predictably and in good time. While this is very often the case, when decisions are made outside of these frameworks, and when decisions are made with short notice, significant challenges arise for harvesters and processors. Robust core fisheries science must underpin all of government's decisions in this space. Canadian fisheries would benefit from additional investments in core fisheries science upon which government can draw upon for its decision-making. And in order to minimize unnecessary and unintended negative impacts on our sector and the communities that they serve, seafood harvesters and processors must be part of any and all discussions where external considerations are being considered. Industry is a reliable partner that has the capacity and capability in many fisheries to aid in the collection and analysis of fisheries science. With many fisheries, industry is already investing in surveys being used to inform Government of Canada decision-making. There's additional opportunity here. FCC has had positive initial discussions with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and we look forward to making further progress in this space. En bref, le CCP.
In short, the FCC and its members believe that the processes and determining opening and closing dates for the predictable and timely and should be based on comprehensive and robust scientific data, and to achieve this and announce opening and closing dates well in advance. In most cases, Canada has a strong track record, and we have the opportunity to improve it further. Thank you once again, and I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Mr. McClinton. So we now have the witnesses presenting, and I will open up this to the question and answer session. The first one is 6 minutes. The 6 minutes includes questions and answers, so I would like everyone to be as concise as they can. Beginning with the Conservatives, Mr. Arnold, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to thank all the witnesses for appearing today. The study has come to be to light as being very important to harvesters of all types due to safety, access, and so on. Mr. Wareham, I'll start with you. You mentioned the delays in openings have caused significant loss of prime harvest time and so on. What would be the tradition, or I guess, what would be a typical time for the season to be announced, and how much of a delay did you see in some of these?
Thank you very much for your question. So I guess given what happened in 2025, we tried to improve on that in 2026. So the science for Northern Cod was announced in late March. I think it was made public, the technical briefing, April 1st or 2nd. DFO then had a groundfish advisory meeting earlier than normal. They had it on April 8th, working towards a decision the next week or so. So, we did move it up this year to try and so everybody was around the table. After we had the science, they gave their opinions on what the quota should be, how we should manage the fishery. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Newfoundland, for cod anyway, specifically on Northern Cod, they issue paper licenses today. I don't know if they do that everywhere, but they do it in Newfoundland. So it's a 2 weeks process. So even if we get a decision in the next week, and then the industry agrees that we're going to open on July the 1st, we have to go back 2 weeks. DFO requires 2 weeks' notice to get actually issue the license conditions to the fishermen. So there's a minimum of a 2-week delay from the day the quota is announced before you can have an opening date. And we have a spawning closure, as I said in my opening remarks, in place through June the 30th right now. So the earliest Northern Cod can open is July the 1st. But to do that, we need a decision in the next week or so.
Okay, thank you. And are harvesters willing to move to an electronic notice? Or what are the impediments to going to a faster, more efficient process?
I guess, hard for me to speak on behalf of the harvesters, but, I would think that's more of a question for the department. Can the department get there? Really, to me.
So you're unsure if the department has a capacity to move away from the paper type.
That'd be my question.
Licenses.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we have seen where, over the years, where seasons were closed basically at the drop of a hammer. Harvesters that were on the water harvesting found out that the season was closed. That didn't take 2 weeks to happen. Why the difference in your understanding?
I I can't answer that question on why that's, why it's a paper license requirement today in 2026. But I do know that, in terms of closing dates, the catches are monitored very closely, and the system is updated within 48 hours in Newfoundland. So we're keenly aware when cod closures will happen based on the catch.
So the department is able to issue closure notices electronically by hailing boats and so on. It can happen quite quickly.
Yes.
But they aren't capable of doing the same process for opening.
That's my understanding today.
And is this putting, you mentioned that harvesters missed the best opportunities to harvest. Can you elaborate a little further on that?
Sure. So, as I said, northern cod is a migratory stock, and it spends its winter in the offshore, and it comes in late June, early July to feed, to spawn, and then eat capelin, and then go back out for its life in the winter again. So, it's physically in the inshore from late June through early September. That's when it's physically there. So, if we're going to be able to have the maximum catching ability for inshore cod in Newfoundland, we need to get it open on July the 1st. That's the earliest it can open today.
Okay, we've heard some suggest that the season should be extended if it's open. If it is late opening, the season should be extended. Is that as valuable as those prime times at the opening, early opening date?
No, for me, it'd be more, it'd be better to open it as soon as we can, because that's when the fish is there and the weather allows fishermen and inshore day boats to fish. When you extend into the fall, then you're pushing the weather, you're pushing safety, the fish move in deeper water. It's not the same. As a delayed opening, a delayed closure is not as good as an early opening.
Okay, Mr. McClinton, are you able to elaborate any further on this from what you've heard from harvesters?
Yeah, thanks.
1 minute.
Thanks, Mr. Arnold. Look, I think I've heard from other witnesses, and certainly this is, from my perspective and everything I've been hearing from members, we need to be meaningfully consulted on things that have an impact for us, right? So in terms of, moving in 2026 from a paper-based system to an electronic-based system, I think that is definitely worth exploring. We want to make sure that we do that in such a way that doesn't have unintended negative impacts on, somebody's systems or processes, that may be built around that. But we should absolutely, I think, have a meaningful discussion around that. And predictability and transparency.
30 seconds.
And sorry, I thought I was being cut off. So
Go
predictability
ahead.
and transparency in terms of opening and closing dates, right? So if something is having an impact on an opening date, I think for the most part, Canada has a very strong track record for this. But when there is an impact, it would be good to know, what legitimately triggers that and how industry can contribute. But the more predictable and timely that it is, the better. So we'd like to avoid late openings and late closures and that sort of thing to the extent possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I go to Ms. Connors from the Liberals. 6 minutes, please.
Good day and welcome to all the witnesses here today. I just want to get a bit of a clarification from Mr. Ware. When you mentioned about the paper licenses, that's for inshore, midshore, and offshore. Inshore.
Yeah, well, I guess the paper license for the inshore for sure, and the offshore as well. Yes, we have paper license conditions as well.
Okay. I want to talk about Mr. Ware, about the economic impact of a 2-week delay or delayed openings. Can you give us some more details on what the economic impact is?
Sure. So, and I'll get using my example from my remarks. So, 5,650 tons of inshore cod left in the water last year. That'd be $12 million paid to inshore fishermen, and it'd be $3 million in work at Arnold's Cove in wages, but as also product for our customers in markets that are desperately needing cod right now. When the cod fishery was open last year and all the processors were buying, we were buying 2,300 metric tons of quota weight per week. So in 2 weeks we could land 4,000. We could buy 4,600 metric tons. So it's very important to get a timely opening for northern cod.
And you mentioned so the processing capacity. That would not be an issue or concern from your perspective.
No.
You're capable of processing what can be caught,
Yes.
and the market is there for.
The market has never been better. I mean, the world cod supply is down 40% in the last 5 years. Northern cod, Canadian cod is the only cod stock that's growing in the world. The world is watching right now. Everybody is eager for the Canadian cod quota to increase in line with science, and we have the markets.
Okay, I wanted to just talk about stock migration too, and you said inshore, offshore. Are there different areas that are, I know the northern cod is back, what other areas around the island or around Atlantic Canada that you see as improving?
So cod spends its winter in 2J primarily, and then it comes into the inshore areas in 3K and 3L in the summer months, and then it goes back. We have a fisheries improvement project that we've been doing for 10 years now in the process of getting northern cod MSC certified. We announced in Barcelona at the Seafood Exposition several weeks ago that we have entered MSC full assessment. And part of that work is migration patterns and tracking the migration patterns. So we've tagged 1,100 cod, northern cod. Some of the tags are, the batteries operate for 5 years. We have 75 transponders put in the ocean on the northeast coast of Newfoundland. So we are monitoring the migration patterns. The ecosystem has changed since the early 80s and 90s. So we need to study the migration patterns so we understand the movements of the cod to be able to manage the fishery better based on current management and science.
Thank you very much. Last year there was some of the inshore fishery went uncut, the total allowable catch. Do you know why that was uncut? Why that?
Well, I mean,
was left in the water?
we did have, the delayed season was a contributing factor to that. As well, we had, unfortunately, for the first time in Newfoundland's history, I think we had the wildfires, as you know, in Conception Bay. Yeah. Some of the fishermen had to evacuate, so they couldn't fish. The fish moved out of Conception Bay, sort of interestingly, 2 weeks earlier last year than the year before. So the fish, for whether it was environmental conditions or whatever, but the fish moved. So the fish weren't there for the fishermen, so they couldn't catch them. So I guess it was a combination of a multitude of things. So we had delayed opening, we had evacuation, we had fish moving, and after Labor Day in Newfoundland, as you're aware, I mean, the weather patterns change, and it's not safe to go on a day boat out in Bonavista. Vista. I mean, you mightn't come back. So it's the weather plays a very big part in the day boat fishery.
How do you think that the industry can be more involved in the decision making of the opening and closing? More of the opening, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think we're involved today. I mean, we're in the Groundfish Advisory meeting. We're meeting with the department on a regular basis. The decision just seems to take a little longer. But industry, I mean, we are actively engaged on a regular basis. So, I mean, we are making these points, these facts. They're aware of the situation. So we just need to make the decision and get the quota announced.
So you think all the information is there?
All the information is there.
And do you have any idea of a reason why it would be delayed?
1 minute.
No, I mean, I guess that's for the department to. I mean, obviously there's procedures. I mean, we get together on April the 8th in a Groundfish Advisory meeting in Newfoundland with all sectors there, inshore, offshore, Indigenous, everyone, DFO Science, and then that takes a process. So the Newfoundland region has to report back into Kent Street, and then Kent Street have to do their thing. So it does take some time. It's not going to happen overnight, but we are actively involved in the process.
Okay, thank you very much. I got a couple of seconds there, but I'm good.
30 seconds, yeah.
Yeah, I'm good.
Thank you, Paul. I now go to Monsieur Champoux. 6 minutes, Martin.
Plus les 30 secondes que Monsieur.
Plus the 30 seconds that Mr. O'Connor left on the floor, Madam Chair, if I may. As usual, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. I will continue in the same train of questions that my colleague, Mr. Connor, had for you, Mr. McClinton. We have heard a lot about the opening dates and the closing dates during that period. So I want you to, could you describe the current process of the MPO right now. That's with respect to consulting, determining the opening dates and the closing dates. Do you think that the process is done early enough? Are the consultations done adequately? Are they properly informed? Do the consultations lead to the industry and stakeholders in the industry to, having an influence in the decision making? Can you expatiate on that?
Underscoring what I mentioned in my opening remarks, that for the most part, what I'm hearing from members is that the processes are working well, and my comments are meant to be taken in the spirit of continuous improvement. What I am hearing, for the most part, when I speak with members, is that most of the challenges with regards to opening and closing dates, a lot of them are coming from our members on the Pacific Coast, on the West Coast. And so I'll invite FCC member Grant Dovey to comment on his experience in a second. But, that's where most of the challenges are. But what I'm hearing is that the more transparent and clear the processes are, and that the government actually adheres to them, the better. But I'll ask Mr. Dovey to comment on his experience.
Certainement, Monsieur Dovey.
Of course, Mr. Dovey.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason. I could use the Pacific prawn fishery as an example. This is fishery typically opens mid-May, and the IFMP, the managers did a good job of conducting the advisory committee meetings and putting the IFMP up for review, but we still didn't get sign off on the IFMP until the end of April, and it had indications that the fishery would start mid-May, but then we needed the official fishery notice to come out before that opened, and we didn't get that fishery notice until 6 days before our May 13th opening. So you can imagine the difficulties around logistics with teeing up crews, buyers, ice, grub, everything around that situation. It's really untenable. It's the latest we've seen that in the fishery on the West Coast.
Est-ce que, quand il y a eu des situations, des impondérables,
When there were situations like we saw with ice in the Atlantic, that's the sector that my colleague, Mr. Alexis Deschênes, that I'm replacing today, he covers that sector because of his geographic proximity. Do you think that there has been consultations with fishermen, fisher people in these fishing communities who are affected by those conditions? Do you think that they are taken into account in the consultations or not? And how do we manage that? Is there some flexibility to adapt, in your opinion, to those unexpected factors that could happen in the beginning of the season?
Part, I think that things, what I'm hearing from members, that things are generally working well. And I would also underscore, like, things, anything to do with safety, right? Like, safety is an absolute top priority for Fisheries Council of Canada members. So there are other factors that one must consider when making decisions around opening and closing dates. Where I think the opportunity lies is in more clearness and openness around what the process is, and making sure that in all cases that everyone understands that, and that those are adhered to, and that timely decisions are made. But for the most part, what I'm hearing from members, particularly on the East Coast, is that much of the decision-making processes are working generally well, and so my comments are meant, for continuous improvement.
entendez-vous parmi vos membres?
So, when you're talking about your more experienced members, do you hear comments like increasingly there are new criteria added to the evaluation for the opening, and even for the verification of stocks, etc.? Do you hear people saying that many more criteria have been added over the years and that some of these criteria are exaggerated? Have you heard such comments?
about new
30
criteria
seconds.
being added for members. What I am hearing a lot, particularly from members on the West Coast, is that there are so many other things being thrown at them at the same time, right? So we're talking right now about opening and closing dates, but there are things like marine protected areas and all kinds of other things that are being thrown at them. It's a tough business at the best of times, so there's so many variables that we don't have control over that let's try to be as predictable and timely as we can with the things that we do have control over.
Thank you. We now go to a second round of questioning, and that's a 5-minute round. And so I begin with Mr. Gunn for the Conservatives. 5 minutes, please.
All right, thank you, Chair. And Mr. McClinton, I have a question as it pertains to fisheries on the West Coast. So can I just address that to Mr. Dovey? Mr. Dovey, across BC, we've had a number of examples of Indigenous groups, be they First Nation, band councils, or hereditary chiefs, unilaterally declare an area closed to fishing to non-band members. Have you had any experience with these pronouncements?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Gunn. Predictable protocols where commercial fishing is meaningfully engaged is a key. We have had experience where IPCAs are declared either mid-season or where the IFMP is released. And look, when the IFMP is released, DFO needs a protocol to ensure that the areas assigned to that IFMP will be accessible. And we've had situations where DFO says an area is open and a nation has declared an IPCA and say it's not. And then we're left with conflict on the water, and it's hard for the fishermen to have the capacity to sort those out in order to access an area.
So we've been told at this committee here repeatedly by DFO officials and the minister herself that only the government has the federal government has the ability and the right to close areas to fishing. Does DFO clarify this and defend the rights of fishermen to access these areas where there is where it becomes uncertain about what the status is?
The DFO, in my experience in the Geoduck fishery, has maintained areas as open to the fishery, but they need to discuss, IPCAs need to be discussed ahead of the release of the IFMP. DFO nations and stakeholders need to be at the table to discuss those potential IPCAs. And because otherwise, if it's a situation where we've got the department saying an area is open and the nation say it's not, the department only has so many resources to be on such a remote coast, and it leads to situations where we can't complete the quota.
Yeah, it seems like a situation that would be bad for everybody, First Nations, fish harvesters, the rule of law. Do you have an example, a specific example of where this has happened and how it's affected a fishery and what the consequences of this uncertainty has been?
Yeah, no, there's an example from this past season on the Central Coast where the IFMP included quota in Kitasoo Bay. The Kitasoo Nation had declared Kitasoo Bay a IPCA, and once the IFMP was released, it contacted the UHA about coming up with an alternative to harvest in Kitasoo Bay. And that was a really difficult situation for industry to be put in. And we really didn't have any conversation with all three parties until really late in the game, towards the end of the season, when we ended up with biotoxin issues and weather issues that ended up the area wasn't able to be fished due to potential conflict and other external factors.
And just to clarify, with this closure of Kitasoo Bay, was this just kind of like a unilateral declaration pronouncement? And if so, do you have evidence of that, or a letter or an email that you can from the band that you can submit as evidence to this committee?
Sorry, Mr. Gunn, you broke up a little bit, but I think I got the gist of it. The Kitasoo have declared Kitasoo Bay as a priority for a number of years now, including the 2023 and 2026 rotation. What we're asking for is that these IPCAs be incorporated into the existing NSB implementation regulations. And for example, there's a Central Coast NMCA that's on the board for this area, and Kitasoo declared that area is closed outside of that process, which makes it next to impossible to prosecute the fishery.
Chair, I think I must have cut out or something. There's a technical issue because I asked for a specific request.
Okay, I'll give you 30 seconds.
I just need to repeat it. Mr. Dovey, I asked, was there a unilateral pronouncement from the band about this closure? And if so, do you have evidence of that you could submit to this committee?
The Kitasoo have released a management plan for Kitasoo Bay. Yes, yeah, I can submit that. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I now go to Mr. Klassen for 5 minutes, please, for the Liberals.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks to all the witnesses for appearing here today. This question is to Ms. Paul. The Fisheries Act requires the Minister to consider impacts on Indigenous rights when making fisheries decisions. Have there been examples, could you give an example where Indigenous observation is different than DFO science, and how should these differences then be reconciled?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if my technician made it on the call. James McDonald?
No.
No. Okay. I will try my best to answer this question. So you were asking if Indigenous observation versus Western science?
Decision making. Is there differences of opinions, and how are they reconciled?
So based on just the information I would have known, so I used to be chief for my community for 12 years, and we're a fishing community. And I think that the best example I could give is when we would have consultation, whatever you may call it, with DFO. We were able to come together and have meaningful conversations with regards to fisheries in our area. And the piece that I really liked was that they did listen to what the historical context of our fisheries look like, and how do we come together to align the priorities of DFO and the community into figuring out what is the best path forward. So there has been instances that I know where we have come together to have that conversation and to respectfully listen to the nation with regards to the science that they've held for time immemorial. I guess you can say something that would have been passed along over the years. And for me, as the chief who's not a fisher, it was absolutely interesting to be in the room to hear those conversations and to hear the respect from both parties as to moving forward on decisions.
Thank you very much. My next question is to...
excuse me, Mr. Klassen. I think Mr. McDonald is on now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
It's okay. I think I'll move to another question to Mr. McClinton or Mr. Dovey. You talked about the decision coming quite late. I couldn't remember. Did you say when the committee met? But the decision was made mid-May, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the delay, and do you know why the decision was? I think it was about a 2-month delay from the time the committee met until the decision was made.
Well, if that's all right, Mr. Klassen, I'll defer to Mr. Dovey on that. But what I will underscore is that these impacts have very real consequences, and I thank Mr. Dovey to speak to his specific experience. But it's negative on harvesters. It's negative on their employees. It's negative on the communities they serve. But Mr. Dovey, to your experience on that specific question.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mr. Klassen. So the advisory committees were completed in the fall as per normal, and usually the IFMP is released, sometime closer to the beginning of the new year. The fishery opened May 13th. Prior to that, the IFMP was released at the end of April, and then we didn't have an official fishery notice confirming that date until 6 days before the opening. So that's the timing, which is really unworkable for coordinating your crew and activities leading up to an opening. And I don't know why. We don't know why it took so long. It seemed like the IFMP and the target date was never changed from the fall meetings. But there's something to do with the process needs to change within DFO. I'm not sure what's happening in the background that delays things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I go to Mr. Champoux for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Wareham, I believe it's a challenge. I can imagine that it's a challenge to have some predictability in your industry. I can imagine that organizing yourself around the variables that we talked about earlier, whether it's the late opening, whether it's the closing, and the other factors that come into play, that could be difficult. So how do you handle this uncertainty, and are things done adequately on the part of the government? Are things done adequately to give your industry some certain level of predictability? Do you think that things could be done better? Do you think that you are critical of the way the DFO does things?
With opening date of Northern Cod, we're working on that, as I said, this year. I think the government has heard what our concerns of last year. They moved the advisory meeting ahead, as I said, but I guess at the same time, we have workers that are expecting to come to work. We have customers that are expecting product. I had an email this morning about, when is the first load of Northern Cod from 2026 going to arrive in Europe? I don't know when it's going to open yet, so I can't explain to people, when it's going to arrive. There's packaging, it's many things that you have to get ready for. So I guess all you do is you do the best job you can, but working with the department as best we can to get the fishery open is the solution.
Est-ce que vous avez l'impression que la
Do you think that communication is efficient? Do you sometimes feel that you are the last ones to be informed about decisions that are made, or are you in the loop early enough? Does it give you an opportunity to be as much as possible ready or predict things?
But then it sort of takes a life of its own. I don't know how to explain it, but as I said, the region in Newfoundland, they have to write their report. They send it to Ottawa. The fisheries management looks at it. Science looks at it. So there are multiple people that look at it. So we're definitely in the loop early, but getting the decision made seems to take the time. That seems to be the issue.
Est-ce que vous avez l'impression que les mesures qui sont prises?
Do you feel that measures that are taken to protect species, are they constraining for your industry? Do you think that we should improve on that, or do you agree with the processes that are in place right now?
Which we do agree with, as I said in my opening remarks, is the spawning closure. The ecosystem is very different in 2026 than it was in 1980, 1990. So once we understand from a science perspective, the updated spawning time of Northern Cod, then we could adjust the spawning closure. That may allow the fishery to start earlier. Maybe the fish are migrating earlier. That's what our study on the Fisheries Improvement Project should be able to tell us. So in general, we do work very good with fisheries management and science. So I guess we're involved early, but we got to speed up the process in between. That'll be my answer.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I want to thank the witnesses for coming and presenting and helping us with your expertise. And so I'm going to suspend until we get the second round going. and I want to make a few comments for the benefits of the new witnesses, and that is that please address your comments through the chair. You have a little video thing that looks like a globe at the bottom of your screen. You can use that for translation into whatever language you're most comfortable with. And you have 5 minutes to present on behalf of your group. So I begin with Mr. Douglas Mavin as an individual, and Ghislaine Sir as a retired fisherman. So we will begin with Mr.
Claire and his daughter.
Oh, we begin with Miss Mavin. For 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair and honorable members of Parliament. My name is Claire Mavin. For over 10 years, I have fished commercially alongside my father, Doug Mavin, harvesting halibut.
Excuse me, let's stop the time.
On this industry.
I'm sorry, Miss Mavin, you cut out right then and there, so maybe you could make sure that your microphone is properly placed and everything. Okay, thank you. Go back, go ahead. We've paused your time. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've fished commercially alongside my father, Doug Mavin, harvesting halibut, salmon, brownfish, and prawns. I am the fourth generation of my family to rely on this industry to sustain our livelihood. Being raised in commercial fishing has shaped who I am. It has taught me determination, perseverance, patience, and work ethic, all while allowing me to financially support myself through my university education. Running a fishing operation requires immense preparation, complex logistics, and capital investment. Every decision we make is entirely dependent on timely opening and closure notifications from DFO, and it's important in managing costs and running a fishing business efficiently. DFO's current trend of delayed management has had severe consequences for harvesters. We saw this clearly last prawn season, when the fleet was given only a few days' notice for a closure. Boats were caught in logistically challenging situations, which increased costs for many harvesters. It impacted fishing productivity and challenged sustainable fishing practices. This year, the pattern inverted. We were given incredibly short notice for an opening date that has been historically consistent. This lack of predictability creates immediate, unnecessary financial and physical hardships for all fishery participants. Of deepest concern to me, however, is the management of our salmon troll fishery. Due to the incongruency of opening dates and the run timing, the majority of the stock has migrated past our area before we are granted access. This leaves approximately half of our allowable quota unfulfilled, resulting in significantly reduced earnings for the fleet. Earnings that make our livelihood after we have recovered the costs of operation. These reduced earnings are not a result of fleet competency or skill, but because of departmental policy. This policy has severe personal costs. To avoid losing vital income, I am forced to miss the first few weeks of university classes each year. Meanwhile, my siblings have missed out on crucial earnings as the fishery is pushed later and later into the fall. Due to the late opening timing, each day is precious, and we are forced to fish through unsafe weather and adversity to maximize a window that is far too narrow. While our commercial fleet is heavily curtailed, we watch other user groups increase their harvest levels on the very fish we are prohibited from catching. Our fleet is forced to fish last after every other user group has already been granted access. This policy of preferential access, where the commercial sector is starved of opportunity, is unacceptable. It diminishes our industry and actively pushes the next generation out. Maintaining a professional crew is virtually impossible under these conditions. forcing captains to rely increasingly on students and part-time workers. Managing this high turnover availability is already a significant challenge for harvesters, and the department's lack of timely notice only compounds this difficulty. I am one of 4 siblings. None of us plan a life in commercial fishing. We want to, but we cannot, because current policy trends give younger generations absolutely no hope for a viable future. I urge this committee to hold the department accountable, demand transparent, standardized timelines for openings and closures, and restore equitable access to the commercial troll fleet. Thank you, and I gratefully accept your questions.
Thank you very much. And now go Ms. Ghislaine, sir, retired fisherman, for 5 minutes, please. Before we set the clock on this, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have bells at 12:30 for votes at 1. And so I'm getting unanimous consent for us to go the extra 15 minutes and the 30-minute bell. I think I have it from everybody. And I also wanted to suggest that everyone has agreed. We've shopped you out, and you've agreed that you want to come back at 1:30. At 1:30, we begin an in-camera session to deal with the Fisheries Act. So just to give you that piece of homework. Thank you.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente, membres du comité.
Good morning, committee members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you about something that is important to me. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Gila Sir. I'm a retired commercial groundfish, pelagic species, and crab fisher and seal hunter. As a committed fisher and citizen, my interest in practicing sustainable, environmentally responsible fishing was grounded in an ecosystem-based vision and a deep understanding of marine environment. Fishing could never be separated from the health, well-being, safety, and food sovereignty of our communities. To advance these objectives, I became actively involved and sought out researchers in the fields of marine science, health, and social sciences. This close collaboration led to my receiving an honorary doctorate from the Université de Laval Faculty of Medicine and to my becoming an ambassador for our planetary health. Drawing on these various areas of expertise, I will examine the factors that determine the opening, reopening, and closing dates of marine harvesting seasons. This is a very broad topic. It requires an understanding of the specific characteristics of a species, a solid grasp of the marine system and its interactions. Decisions must be carefully analyzed and considered in a comprehensive and integrated manner. We must ensure that the large spawners are preserved in order to maintain the long-term viability of a stock, as is done in the lobster fishery. We must also take the spawning period into account. For example, for mackerel, it is from May to mid-July. Over the past 10 years, everything has been changing rapidly. Temperature, predation, depredation, the absence of ice, increased food availability in certain areas, geographic shifts, etc. And we are seeing the changes in the patterns of several resources as well. Since 2017, the arrival of great white sharks has also been contributing factors. Halibut has been in decline around the islands. Sharks prey on marine mammals. They are driving gray seals closer to shore into other areas, and they will have a negative impact once again. We can expect effects on salmon, beluga whales, and other species. However, as gray seas move, this displacement contributes to the increase in cod biomass in our region. So we must learn from past mistakes and avoid reopening under the same conditions as what happened with the 3 cod moratoriums. And we must identify the most appropriate and most sustainable fishing gear based on the scientific characteristics of each resource. Mackerel is another example. We know that Fisheries and Oceans Canada considers it low value, but it is vitally important for coastal communities, for local culture, for its exceptional nutritional value, and for its affordability, especially in the current economic context. Why consider prioritizing this resource, currently under moratorium, solely for bait when it can be a high-quality food source? Mackerel is a fragile species. No mackerel should be released, as post-release mortality is close to 90%. Fish quality is higher and keeps better when caught on a hook, allowing the resource to meet everyone's needs, both for human consumption and for bait. This approach allows science to obtain more accurate data, providing better overall picture of the biomass. Gill nets used for mackerel result in the unrecorded losses of large spawners due to suffocation. This species is of lower quality and poorly suited for human consumption. Authorizing a mackerel fishery solely for bait and not for human consumption, using gill nets rather than hooks, as many fishers and members of the public had requested, and doing so during the spawning period, is deeply problematic. Moreover, given that the species is under moratorium, the decision is difficult to understand, if not unacceptable. Fishing is a privilege, not a right. The resource belongs to the community and not only to the fishers. I would also like fishers and decision makers to reflect on bait sourcing. Currently, I am extremely concerned about the astronomical quantity of resources used for bait. Reducing bait is essential. The impact on health of our resources and our oceans can be significant. My experience has shown that my experience has shown that very small amounts of fish can be used as bait without reducing the harvest. In some cases, reducing bait can lead to higher catches. Fish residues can be added to bait for certain types of fisheries.
To Mr. Barron, President of the Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association. For 5 minutes, please, Mr. Barron.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair and honorable committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. It is always an honor to present the harvester's perspective on issues affecting the fishing industry in Atlantic Canada, especially my home region, Cape Breton. I currently serve as president of the Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association, and I am also an independent owner-operator of a commercial fishing enterprise that gives me not only the responsibility of representing harvesters, but also firsthand experience with the realities facing our industry every day on the water. This study comes at an important time as we've recently seen adjustments to lobster harvesting seasons in eastern Nova Scotia, with openings in some areas moving approximately 7 to 14 days earlier. These decisions are not made lightly. They involve ongoing discussions between harvesters, port representatives, scientists, and Department of Fisheries and Oceans through both spring and fall advisory meetings. One point I want to emphasize today is every lobster fishing area, or LFA, is different. What works in one area does not necessarily work in another. Even within Nova Scotia, weather patterns, ocean conditions, harbor access, and fishing realities can vary from port to port. For example, in LFA 27 is one of the largest lobster fishing areas in the province, and that alone creates challenge. Certain wind directions may prevent safe fishing in one harbor while having little impact on another. Ice conditions, storm, sea state, and harbor infrastructure also influence it's safe and practical for fish harvesters. Safety must remain top priority in any season-setting discussion. Harvesters are prepared to work hard, but not one should be placed in unsafe situations because of rigid timelines that do not reflect actual conditions on the water. Another important issue is communication and consultation. The department often relies heavily on port representatives to communicate with harvesters and bring feedback forward. While the system plays an important role, it is not without challenges. You frequently hear concerns from harvesters who feel they are not properly represented or adequately consulted. In many cases, representatives are doing their best, but communication can break down in large, diverse fishing areas. Information is only effective if people trust the process behind it. Building and maintaining trust is critical. Climate change is also becoming a major factor in DFO decision-making, and harvesters are witnessing those changes firsthand. Warmer ocean temperatures are affecting lobster movement, molting periods, and overall condition of stock throughout the season. In some areas, warming waters in the season are also creating concerns around the handling and protection of egg-bearing and buried females. Conservation measures must continue to evolve alongside the environmental changes if we want healthy and sustainable stocks for the future generations. Science absolutely plays an important role in the season-setting decisions. DFO considers stock assessments, water temperatures, conservation targets, along sustainability objectives. Harvesters understand the importance of protecting the resource because our livelihoods, communities, and the future depend on it. At the same time, local knowledge and practical fishing experience must continue to be respected alongside scientific advice. Harvesters spend their lives on the water, and their firsthand observations provide valuable insight that should remain part of the decision-making process. Economic pressures are another reality that cannot be ignored. Fuel prices remain extremely high, bait prices are at an all-time high, and the price of lobster itself has not changed significantly over the last 4 years. Meanwhile, costs for crews, maintenance, insurance, and day-to-day operations continue to rise. This is why access to local bait sources is important. Reasonable bait conditions can help alleviate some of the financial pressures to reduce operating costs during an already difficult season. In LFA 27 specifically, bait condition. Yes?
1 minute left.
Okay. In LFA 27 specifically, bait conditions for upcoming season were not released until May 27th, despite the lobster season already being into its third week. By that point, many of the larger mackerel had already moved on. This is another example why industry knowledge on the water and experience needed to rely upon more heavily in the decision-making process. This is traditionally the time of year when Gaspereau and mackerel move through the area, and harvesters missed an important opportunity to help offset some of the operating costs.
Have you finished? Thank you.
Pardon me?
I think your time is up.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry you went blank there for a moment. So now I go to the final person, and that's Mr. Fisher from the Fraser Salmon Management Council. Mr. Fisher for 5 minutes.
Swale, Siem Talalkal Telsqui. Hello, and thank you to Madam Chair and the Standing Committee for hearing me witness this study. I'm Aidan Fisher. I am Stalo from the community of Chiacton and Chilliwack, BC. I'm participating today from the South Simook Territory in Vancouver. As mentioned, I work for the Fraser Salmon Management Council as a fisheries biologist. Through this role, I co-chair the Joint Technical Committee to the Fraser Salmon Management Board. The FSMC, Fraser Salmon Management Council, serves as the secretariat for the Fraser Salmon Management Board and convener of Fraser and Marine Approach Area First Nations to advance nation-to-nation collaborations and decision-making for First Nations governance and management of Fraser salmon fisheries and their conservation. The Fraser Salmon Management Board and the Joint Tech Committee were created to support the implementation of the Fraser Salmon Collaborative Management Agreement. The CMA was signed in 2019 between Canada and 76 First Nations from the Fraser and Marine Approach areas. Work to begin the process of establishing the CMA started in 2012 between Canada and 60 First Nations. Now the FSMC has 81 signatory First Nations communities. The purpose of the Fraser Salmon CMA is to create, promote, and support government-to-government, nation-to-nation structures for the collaborative governance, management, and conservation of Fraser salmon. The CMA provides guiding principles, roles, and processes for the executive, the Fraser Salmon Management Board, and the Joint Tech Committee to support Fisheries and Oceans Canada and FSMC in their respective decision-making authorities, responsibilities, laws, and jurisdictions as they relate to Fraser salmon. The CMA provides a framework for government-to-government decision-making by the parties, which are Canada and First Nations, at the migratory route scale on prioritized Fraser salmon fishery management concerns identified in their Fraser Salmon Management Board annual work plan. The Joint Technical Committee is a technical review committee appointed by FSMC and DFO. The JTC has participation from 10 appointees, 5 from Fraser Salmon Management Council on behalf of First Nations, and 5 appointees from DFO. The JTC is tasked with reviewing and providing recommendations to the Fraser Salmon Management Board on technical aspects of Fraser salmon fishery management for the board. Since 2019, the FSMB and the JTC have been working to develop operational processes to implement the Collaborative Management Agreement. There is no handbook on how to implement the Salmon Fisheries Co-Governance Agreement between First Nations and Canada. FSMC and DFO are still actively working on processes to implement the Collaborative Management Agreement. More recently, the Fraser Salmon Management Board has made some consensus recommendations to Fraser Salmon Fisheries Management. For example, potential for increasing the First Nations food, social, and ceremonial harvest targets for sockeye on an abundant year, which was 2022, and the Fraser Sockeye Escapement Plan for multiple years, which has occurred more recently. The Fraser Salmon Management Board, however, has not been able to implement the Collaborative Management Agreement on other aspects of the Fraser Salmon fishery. There has been substantive amounts of work done through the Joint Tech Committee and the Fraser Salmon Management Board on Fraser Chinook management for years, but has not resulted in the Fraser Salmon Management Board making recommendations on Fraser Chinook management. The Fraser Salmon Management Board has entered into their official dispute resolution process laid out in the Collaborative Management Agreement multiple times on this topic. It is important to recognize the scope of the Fraser Salmon Management Board and the Fraser Salmon Management Council. The DFO structure to manage fisheries is very much still in place. Openings, allocations, licensing, etc. are all still part of the DFO structure, and they are predominantly still handled by pre-existing DFO structures and processes. The Fraser Salmon Management Board is operating at a broader or higher level, like discussions and decisions on overall management objectives on conservation and escapement or harvest objectives. The Collaborative Management Agreement and associated processes, like the Fraser Salmon Management Board and the Joint Tech Committee, are still very new. So far, the Joint Tech Committee has been able to work effectively and produce consensus technical recommendations and reviews to the Fraser Salmon Management Board. The Fraser Salmon Management Board, however, has been more challenged with consensus recommendations. We have seen some progress with DFO to respect the spirit of the CMA, but there does appear to be hesitancy to fully commit to the Collaborative Management Agreement, with the board going through dispute resolution multiple times. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. We're now going to go to a question and answer session. It's 6 minutes. That includes questions and answers. So I will begin with Mr. Arnold from the Conservatives. 6 minutes, please, Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start with Mr. Fisher, if I could. Mr. Fisher, the Fraser Salmon Management Board operates under the auspices of the Fraser Salmon Collaborative Management Agreement. I believe that's what you said. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that agreement was finalized in 2019, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Last year, in 2025, did the Fraser Salmon Management Board set escapement goals for Fraser sockeye?
The Fraser Salmon Management Board provided principles for DFO to set the escapement targets on Fraser sockeye. They didn't provide the final recommendation. This year, however, 2026, the Fraser Salmon Management Board did put forward joint recommendations on the escapement targets for Fraser sockeye.
So the Fraser Salmon Management Board didn't put escapement goals forward? Were those put forward by DFO?
The final numbers were put forward by DFO with principles that had been agreed to by the board, like descriptive principles.
It was the board as a group that came up with the escapement goals. Is that correct?
This year, yes. Last year, not the official, not the final numbers, but the principles behind selecting those final numbers were recommended by the board collaboratively.
Okay, so the escapement goals for last year then, 2025, were they set before the unexpected large return of sockeye?
Yes, they were. The statement of unexpectedly large return, I think, is
so in 2025
requires some more discussion.
Yeah, in 2025, the preseason forecast for all sockeye runs was approximately 2.9 million fish. What actually returned was 9 million sockeye, more than 3 times higher than expected. Why didn't the board or the joint board and DFO adjust the escapement goals to allow for harvest opportunities, despite this return being 3 times higher than forecasted?
The Fraser sockeye escapement plan is variable. Therefore, it does allow and does react to larger abundances. So the actual implementation of the plan operates on a sliding scale.
But last year they didn't. They took forever to get that increase in the total allowable catch. Do you know why?
I don't think that's a fair description of how the escapement plan, the harvest control rule works for Fraser Sockeye. It's much more complicated than the way that you've described it.
Could you provide the committee with the 2012 escapement principles that you talked about?
Fraser
not necessarily
Reverse
today, but could you provide them in writing? The principles.
Yeah, there's lots of information on how the escapement the harvest control rule works. Yeah.
Okay, are you familiar with the concept of overspawning for salmon?
I am familiar with the concept as it has been technically described, but I believe it is misconstrued in a lot of instances.
And was the management board aware of the risks of the overspawn that could have predictably occur if the harvest was not increased last year?
Yes, I would say the entire board is familiar with the concept of overspawning as it's described in the literature, which is, I think, as I said, misunderstood broadly by the public.
Okay, thank you. I want to switch to Ms. Maven now. You talked about
1 minute. Sorry, 2.
Immense preparation and investment in getting ready for a season. I think we understand that, but can you just, I guess, go into a little further in depth in that? Just what's involved in, how long does it take you to find crew? How long does it take to get gear? What kind of dollars are invested to get ready for a season that you don't know if you're going to get it or not?
Thank you so much for your question. That depends. It varies across fisheries. I can speak on the prawn fishery specifically. In terms of sourcing crew for that fishery, when you're working on a freezer boat, packing on a freezer boat is a skill set, and there are a limited amount of people that possess that skill in order to pack for a prawn fishery. And as far as preparation ahead of the season goes, it typically lasts about 2 weeks of, obviously there's work all around the off season that goes into maintaining your boat and things like that. But in terms of prepping for the actual fishery, it's roughly 2 weeks long. So getting notice only a few days, like official notice, only a few days before an opening date is very difficult to plan around when you've got 2 weeks of work.
You mentioned the prep work ahead of time. Do you have to, and packaging on boat, do you have to buy the packaging material and other pieces that are necessary for that process?
Yes, absolutely you do. We get those from our buyers. They supply us with all of our processing materials for the boat.
How long would that take?
I think the time is up, Mr. Arnold. Go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes, please, for the Liberals.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Monsieur C.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. Mr. C, thank you for being here. I'm someone from New Brunswick, and I'm happy to be here to speak with you. You have talked about closing. You've talked about an ecosystem that is really changing, more predators. We see more seals on our coasts, more than what we saw in the past. You talked about white sharks that are more and more present. I hope I won't be one of their prey when I'm on my coast back home, but, well, more seriously speaking, you talking about mackerel fishing, you talked about the food chain, you talked about what it contributes. So with respect to mackerel fishing and the moratorium that was placed on mackerel fishing in the 2000s that the government made, do you think that it was a good decision to make to rebuild the stocks? Well, thank you for that question. I can say that it's never a good decision to completely close a type of fishing, because we as fishermen and fisherwomen, we have long fishing experiences, and we follow year after year mackerel and other species. And we also follow the movement of predators. With respect to mackerel, it's been 10 years that mackerel has changed its way in which it does things. All day long, the mackerel spends its time deep in the sea. It would be considered as a rock on the when we're looking for them. And so, well, on that point, we would love to see this fishing of mackerel be in full capacity one day, whether it's for feeding, whether it's otherwise, even if it's for bait. And it's a difficulty, as we know, for fishermen to get bait. And you said something that we don't necessarily hear with others. You said that mackerel is more sustainable over time. We heard some fishermen say that mackerel is everywhere, deep down and on the surface. So what do you think about that estimate? Do you think that we see more mackerel, or are they more juvenile, or rather more adult, who would be better spawners? Well, I would say that there has been an increase of mackerel in the water. For example, last summer, we had a major storm, and mackerel, there was like 5 meters of mackerel on a continuous line. Sometimes we don't see them. We would see them on a column of water overnight, and then they would go back down into the deep in the evening. And when they get hungry, they come back up, and then they go back into the deep when their stomachs are full. And so we can't capture them at that time. So if we had to reopen mackerel fishing, because we know that there's a quota in place for baits, so if we have an opening for mackerel fishing, maybe a larger quota for mackerel fishing, maybe for more commercial mackerel fishing, do you think that it would damage that resource? Honestly, if we wait for the end of the spawning of mackerel, that is October, September, November, and we fish at that time, we will absolutely not change the biomass of mackerel. Well, I have used nets to fish mackerel, and we know that when mackerel is too large for these nets, it will drown. And so it will go into the deep, and it's not accounted for. And those mackerel generally would have eggs, and so they would spawn. So at the end of the line, that would be positive. If you give enough time, all fishermen, all the fishers will be able to go and seek this mackerel. If we wait for September, October, mackerel will be larger and will be better conducive for human consumption and even for bait. And so fishers, commercial fishers, should have a certain weekly quota to be able to sell it in the community, in the coastal community, because we have eaten mackerel and cod throughout our lives as a coastal community.
Glad that to see also women on the other coast, because there's a lot of women in my area also that are now captain, that are owning license, and like starting in the industry. So I just want to say congratulations to you to being, I think you said, the 4th generation, I think, in your family. So that's wonderful. So one thing that you said about salmon, you said something about that there was group that was able to start first and some other were last. Like, what are the group that was starting first, and what are those one were being last?
Sorry, I am having trouble with my audio.
Can you hear me now? I know my English is not that good. Maybe this is the problem also. Can you hear me now? Ms. Maven?
Sorry.
Have you? Is there an issue? What's the problem? He doesn't, I think it's on her end, the problem is happening.
Okay. Oh, I think she's froze. Froze, yeah.
She's frozen.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think she's frozen, so sorry, Sash.
Do you have time left? No?
Well, you had 30 seconds left.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I now go to Shampoo for 6 minutes, please.
Je ne vous demanderai pas de me redonner les 30 secondes que M. Cormier n'a pas utilisées.
I'm not going to ask for the extra 30 seconds. It didn't work last time. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, witnesses, for being here with us today. Mr. Seah, I found your answers very interesting, the answers you gave to my colleague, and I want to continue in that direction. Do you think that we take enough into account, the memory of fishers when making decisions at the ministry, at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans? You talked about mackerel. That's an excellent example, and I believe that you would agree that the scientific data are not necessarily complete, right? There's some elements missing. Scientists said that the moratorium helps mackerel, and what fishers see is that there are young fish, right? Well, if you're talking about mackerel per se, what we see all summer on other accidental catches, it would be larger mackerel. It is deeper, and it's there everywhere. That's the observation of all fishers everywhere. So mackerel is not a problem. So this is my main question. Do you think that the experience, the expertise that you have garnered on the field over the years has been taken into account by DFO, or do you think that we have given all importance to scientific data whose information collection methods could be questioned at some point in time? Well, I have to say that the scientific value would is dropping over time. Recently, I spoke to some fishers who took part in a scientific event, and they said they didn't understand anything. We are on the water, we're fishermen, and we have some lived experience, and we didn't understand anything, and so they stopped listening online at noon, and they realized that they were not on the same wavelength. So we have observed that a fisher's experience is not valued. Something else that happened to me, someone from DFO said that AI would replace us eventually. Question, so did they say that AI would replace fishers? Well, it's hard to explain, and it's hard to accept, because after 50 years of experience fishing, all kinds of fishing, hearing someone say that to you, it's hard to accept. That's understandable. Well, there has been a consultation table until recently when the DFO ended that. Do you know why they stopped having that consultation table? No. Do you think that it would be because there is a lack of understanding between fishers and other stakeholders around that table? Maybe fishers could be more vocal? Well, I have to tell you that I didn't take part in recent meetings. The last one concerned, it was in Moncton. There were 3 fishers from Newfoundland and myself. And so there were like 20 people, and there were only 3 fishers, so something was wrong. So do you think that it would be worthwhile to have such a table to facilitate understanding between parties and also collaboration? Because we can't want to hear the voices of fishers if those media of communication are cut. I don't think the issue is with scientists. We have always had good relationships. I have always had good relationships with with scientists. Over 30 years, I have fished bottom fishing for about 30 years, and we had good relationships. But the real issue, well, actually, the last meeting that we had with them, they told us that resources are better, and they said they need fishers to have information and inputs. And they also said that there was a 30% increase in the efforts, but then we're closing fishing. So it's difficult to understand. Now, seal hunting. We heard about the displacement and migration of species because of the arrival of some predators in various areas. So I want to know if seal hunting, I know that that was a social issue in the past. I think we have crossed those troubled waters so far, and now we see that the seal is more accepted as a product, and it's an interesting product. But do you think that the management of seal hunting is properly adapted to the changes that we have observed in the migration of species, etc.? Well, seal hunting has been a major topic for about 50 years. We have been trying to promote seal hunting, and what I have seen is an increase in regulations. Hunting is open in the middle of September when storms have started, and so we have less opportunities to go hunting. And we have closed the summer period because there are tourists who want to go and see the seals. But eventually, there are no tourists who go to some areas, and that would be an opportunity for us to go there and hunt. And so these rules are confusing, and we have a hard time adapting because we moved from one species of seals and we're now on the gray seal, and those are completely different species. The way that we hunt them is completely different, and it's difficult to adapt, and the regulations are more stringent.
Bells began at 35 minutes, 12:35, so we can go till 12:50. So I'm going to go to a second round. It's going to be a 3-minute, 3-minute, 2-minute round. We can fit that in before we leave. So I begin the second round. It begins with Mr. Gunn for 3 minutes, please, for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Chair. And Madam Chair, I just want to enter into the record of evidence a press release from the Gitxsan hereditary chiefs related to harvest seasons. And I have a physical copy here to share with the clerk. Ms. Maven, from your experience, do you find that decisions over at DFO regarding to the opening and closing of various fisheries are always driven by science and empirical data, or do they at times tend to be influenced, in your view, by politics and ideology?
Thank you for your question. I personally don't believe that they're driven by science and empirical data. I think that it's mostly departmental policy. There doesn't seem to be a lot of base on biology, abundance, or fleet competency. I think that the policies systematically penalize the commercial sector.
And can you detail, I know you mentioned it a bit in your opening remarks, but can you detail, if the department fails to open a fishery in a timely manner, despite there being sufficient abundance, what are the impacts on fished harvesters and their families?
Well, a lot of it comes down to reduced income for fishermen, especially when you're fishing in the salmon fishery, because you're basing a lot of the fish come through on a migration. They all come through on a migration. And so if your opening is delayed, you miss out on a lot of income, and it impacts all of the harvesters negatively.
And you spoke about the both the quick closing of the prawn season last year, and then this year the delayed notification that it was actually opening. Do you find that there's a lack of predictable communication from DFO regarding season opening and closing dates?
Absolutely. I find that the predictability is it's highly unpredictable at the moment. It doesn't seem to align with stock reports from actual fishermen. And all this does is create unnecessary hardships on fishermen. Running a fishing business is entirely dependent on timely notifications. And lately, the notifications from DFO they're late, they're erratic, and honestly, seemingly baseless on stock strength.
And Mr. Cormier, did you want to ask your question that you got cut off?
You've got 30 seconds through the chair. You have 30 seconds. Serge?
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Yeah, so my question was, like you said, that there was some group that was able to go out fishing for salmon before some other group. So what are those groups that are allowed to go first and then, second, third, and fourth?
Those would be the recreational fishery and certain indigenous groups.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Gunn, for that courtesy. And I want to go now to Mr. Weiler. For 3 minutes, please, Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to witnesses for being here today. I want to ask a number of questions to Mr. Fisher. The Fraser salmon management documents emphasize that in-season decisions are made iteratively as the new test fishery and escapement data becomes available. But in practice, how quickly can those updates be translated into actual changes in the recreational or commercial openings?
It depends based on which species of Fraser salmon you're talking about the management of. Fraser sockeye is managed through the Fraser Panel, which is the international group predominantly, and that group meets like multiple times a week. I attend 5 or 6 meetings a week for the Fraser Panel on Fraser sockeye. Chinook is done predominantly preseason, and then maybe 1 or 2 changes in season based on unexpected information potentially, but predominantly the Chinook fishery is set preseason and before the fishery starts, and then opens as scheduled. Obviously, there can be extraneous situations, but that's generally how it works.
No, I understand how frequently they meet, but how frequently can those changes, those new data, actually lead to changes in the fishery itself?
For sockeye, within a week.
Thank you. And in your view, should there be clearer thresholds or rules when a stock of concern justifies limiting access to other healthier stocks, say in a mixed stock fishery, particularly in the Fraser, but also more broadly in BC?
Yeah, I mean, that's an enormous question that I think mixed stock fisheries have been trying to grapple with for a long time. Certainly more clear rules around what the acceptable limits to impact on stocks of concern is would always be helpful, and it's I think a large problem, a large challenge that needs to be faced in salmon management.
Thank you. Maybe just my last question here is, so the Fraser management is often described as requiring coordination amongst First Nations fisheries, commercial interests, recreational fisheries, and conservation objectives. When those groups have different interpretations of in-season data, how does that affect the speed of decision-making?
For Fraser sockeye, it runs through the Fraser Panel, which means that there's a third party between Canada and the U.S. that handles all the technical information, the Salmon Commission. And then through those Salmon Treaty developed tables, those discussions happen and led through DFO with representatives from all fisheries sitting at the Fraser Panel, informing the DFO chair of their positions, and then brought to international negotiation on fisheries.
That ends that session, and I'll go to Mr. Champoux for 2 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. 2 minutes, c'est assez rapide.
Thank you. 2 minutes is really fast. So very quickly, Mr. Cyr, I'm going to ask you to conclude this round of questions. Do you think, or do you have recommendations to propose to DFO? I can deduce a few recommendations by listening to your testimony today, but is there anything you want to say directly to DFO in when they would take future decisions with respect to the opening and closing of fishing dates? And if you can share recommendations, what would they be? First of all, predictability would be most welcome. Also, listen to the experience of fishers. We hear about the experience of fishers, but we have the feeling that they are not being listened to, even in Newfoundland, for example. And also, in some fishing that is not necessarily lucrative, like mackerel among others, we should pay close attention to those species for the biodiversity. Fishers' experience, they have spent so much time. There are other people who could have doctorates, for example, like me, because it's the scientists, fisheries and oceans, who gave me that privilege of being an honorary doctorate holder. And it's because of the experience that has been accumulated across the Gulf, whether it's Newfoundland, PEI, New Brunswick, anywhere. It's thanks to those meetings that we were able to have this experience. So I would hope that managers at DFO would be able to take into account all of this wealth of experience. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
I want to thank the witnesses for coming on and helping us with their expertise. And we have to leave because we must vote. So I will suspend the meeting until 1:30. Thank you.